Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Matthew Combs adjusted his safety glasses and powered down the lathe in his home workshop. At 38, he'd built a reputation as one of the most innovative mechanical engineers at Lockheed Martin. But his real passion lay in the intricate metalwork he crafted in his garage. The precision required in both his professional and personal projects had taught him patience, attention to detail, and the value of methodical thinking. "Dad, dinner!" his 16-year-old son Eric called from the back door. Behind him, 13-year-old Lana peered out curiously at the brass component Matthew had been machining. "What are you making now?" Lana asked, her bright eyes reflecting the same curiosity that made her excel in her science classes. "Part of a custom lock mechanism," Matthew said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Sometimes the old ways are the most reliable." As they walked toward the house, Matthew felt the familiar surge of contentment that came with his evening routine. The suburban Denver home he'd bought 12 years ago still felt like a sanctuary. Lori had done wonders with the interior design, her artistic eye transforming their house into something that belonged in a magazine. Lori Donovan Combs stood at the stove, her auburn hair catching the warm kitchen light. At 35, she still turned heads, but what had initially drawn Matthew to her wasn't just her beauty. It was her apparent depth, her claims of volunteering with various charities, her passionate discussions about helping those less fortunate. "Smells incredible," Matthew said, kissing her cheek. She tensed slightly, as she had been doing more frequently lately. "Just spaghetti," she said dismissively. "Charlie Ingram called. He can come look at the chest freezer tomorrow morning. Said he's the best appliance repair guy in Jefferson County." Matthew nodded. The 20-year-old chest freezer in the basement had been making concerning noises for weeks. Lori insisted they needed to get it fixed rather than replaced. She claimed it had sentimental value from her grandmother. Over dinner, Eric talked excitedly about his acceptance to the engineering program at Colorado School of Mines. "Dad, I want to be just like you. Build things that matter, solve real problems." Matthew felt pride swell in his chest. Both his children had inherited his analytical mind and moral compass. They questioned things, thought critically, and had strong senses of right and wrong. Speaking of solving problems, Lana interjected, "Mrs. Henderson at school said 3 more kids have gone missing from Denver in the past 6 months. That's really scary." Lori's fork clattered against her plate. "Don't talk about such horrible things at dinner," she snapped, then quickly softened her tone. "Sorry, honey. That kind of news just upsets me." Matthew studied his wife's face. Lori had always been emotional about news stories, but lately, her reaction seemed more intense, almost panicked. He made a mental note to pay closer attention. After dinner, while Lori claimed she was going to her book club, Matthew helped the kids with homework. Eric was working on calculus problems that reminded Matthew of his own engineering school days, while Lana puzzled over a chemistry set Matthew had bought her. "Dad," Lana said quietly, "has Mom seemed different to you lately?" Matthew looked up from Eric's derivatives. His daughter had always been perceptive beyond her years. "Different how?" "She gets these phone calls and goes outside to talk. And yesterday, I saw her putting something in the freezer downstairs, but when I asked what it was, she got really angry. Not normal angry, scared angry." Eric glanced up from his homework. "I noticed too. And she's been gone more nights, claiming book club or volunteer work. But her clothes don't smell like other people's houses. They smell like, I don't know, chemicals." Matthew felt a chill run down his spine, but he maintained his calm exterior. His children were observant and intelligent. If they were noticing inconsistencies, there were inconsistencies to notice. "I'm sure it's nothing serious," he said reassuringly. "But good detective work, you too. Always trust your instincts, but gather evidence before drawing conclusions." That night, Matthew lay awake listening to Lori's steady breathing beside him. Her phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. In the blue glow of the screen, he saw her carefully slip out of bed and pad quietly downstairs. Through their bedroom window, he watched her pacing in the backyard, gesturing animatedly during what appeared to be an intense conversation. When she returned 20 minutes later, Matthew pretended to be asleep, but his engineer's mind was already working, cataloging inconsistencies and formulating hypotheses. Tomorrow, Charlie Ingram would fix the freezer. Matthew had no idea that this routine repair would shatter everything he thought he knew about his life. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Charlie Ingram arrived at 9:15 a.m. sharp, a weathered man in his 50s with calloused hands and kind eyes. He carried a toolkit that looked like it had seen decades of service, and Matthew immediately liked his no-nonsense demeanor. "Appreciate you fitting us in," Matthew said, leading Charlie through the house toward the basement. "My wife says the freezer's been in her family for years." "No problem. These old chest freezers, they're built like tanks. Usually just need a little TLC." Charlie paused at the top of the basement stairs. "She around?" "Some folks like to hover while I work." "Book club meeting," Matthew replied. "She volunteers a lot." The lie came easily, though Matthew wasn't entirely sure why Lori had insisted on being out during the repair. The basement was finished but rarely used, serving mainly as storage and housing the old chest freezer in the far corner. The unit was humming loudly, its compressor working overtime. "Yeah, she's struggling," Charlie said, kneeling beside the freezer. "Mind if I unplug her and take a look inside? Sometimes there's ice buildup that interferes with the mechanisms." Matthew nodded, settling into a nearby chair with his laptop to work on some engineering schematics while Charlie worked. The familiar sounds of diagnostic work, the clink of tools, the occasional grunt of effort, created a comfortable background. 20 minutes later, Charlie's work sounds stopped abruptly. "Mr. Combs?" Charlie's voice had changed, taking on a strained quality that made Matthew look up from his computer. Charlie was standing perfectly still beside the open freezer, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. "What is it?" Matthew asked, rising from his chair. "Sir, I need you to call the police. Right now." Charlie's voice was barely above a whisper. Matthew moved closer, but Charlie held up a shaking hand. Don't look. Just call the police." "Charlie, what the hell?" "Please, Mr. Combs. Trust me on this. Call 911. Tell them you need detectives and the coroner. Then I need you to get your kids and go somewhere safe." The engineer in Matthew demanded data, demanded to understand what was happening. He stepped around Charlie and looked into the freezer. The cold air hit his face, but it wasn't the temperature that made him stagger backward. Wrapped in clear plastic beneath packages of frozen vegetables were human remains. Not old remains, recent ones. And underneath, partially visible, he could make out identification cards and personal effects. Matthew's analytical mind cataloged details even as his stomach churned. The methodical packaging, the deliberate concealment beneath everyday items, the organized nature of the storage. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was systematic. "Oh God," Matthew whispered, then louder, "Oh God, no." Charlie gripped his shoulder. "Mr. Combs, listen to me carefully. While fixing the temperature control, I found more than just bodies. There are photos, documents, what looks like records. This is organized, professional." Matthew's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. His mind raced through implications. Lori's late-night phone calls, her mysterious absences, her panic about the missing children Lana had mentioned. "Why did you tell me to get my kids?" Matthew asked as he dialed 911. Charlie's expression was grim. "Because one of those ID cards in there, it belongs to someone reported missing 2 weeks ago. And there's a notebook with dates, locations, and..." Charlie swallowed hard. "And what looks like a schedule. Your wife's handwriting is on some of the pages." The 911 operator answered, but Matthew could barely form words. His perfect life, his loving wife, his safe home, everything was crumbling around him. 911, what's your emergency?" We found there are bodies in my freezer. Human remains. I need police and detectives." As he gave his address, Matthew's mind began shifting from shock to something harder, more focused. The same analytical approach that made him excellent at engineering problems was kicking in. Evidence, timeline, connections. His wife wasn't just involved in this horror. She was orchestrating it. And if Charlie was right about the schedule, it wasn't over. 20 minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Matthew had already called his kids' schools and arranged for early pickup under the pretense of a family emergency. They were currently at his sister's house across town, safely away from whatever hell was about to descend on his home. But as Detective Brett Lawrence and the crime scene team began their work, Matthew realized safety was only temporary. Because if Lori was capable of this level of deception and violence, what else was she planning? And more importantly, who was helping her? Chapter 3. The Web Unravels. Detective Brett Lawrence had 23 years of experience in Denver PD's Major Crimes Unit, but even he paused when he saw the contents of the Combs family freezer. The scene was methodical, organized, and deeply disturbing. "Mr. Combs," Detective Lawrence said, settling across from Matthew at the kitchen table, "I need you to understand that this is now an active crime scene. You and your children cannot return home until our investigation is complete." Matthew nodded, his engineer's mind still processing the impossibility of his situation. "Detective, I need to know, is my family in danger?" "That's what we're trying to determine." Lawrence opened his notebook. "Tell me about your wife's routine, her friends, where she spent her time." For the next hour, Matthew provided details that now seemed ominous in hindsight. Lori's frequent absences, her secretive phone calls, her insistence on handling certain household tasks alone, including anything involving the basement. The notebook Charlie found, Lawrence said carefully, contains detailed records going back 8 months. Names, dates, locations. We're cross-referencing with missing persons reports, but preliminary analysis suggests your wife has been involved in a trafficking operation. The words hit Matthew like a physical blow. Human trafficking, not a crime of passion or a single terrible mistake. A systematic business of destroying lives. "There's more," Lawrence continued. "The financial records we found suggest this operation involves multiple people and significant money transfers. Your wife wasn't working alone." Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from Lori. "Where are you? Why are police cars at our house?" He showed the message to Lawrence, who immediately motioned to a technician. "We need to trace this and set up monitoring on Mr. Combs' phone. She doesn't know what we've found yet." "Detective," Matthew said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "I want to help catch them. All of them." Lawrence studied Matthew's face. "Mr. Combs, I understand your anger, but this is a police matter now. These people are dangerous." "You don't understand," Matthew replied. "I'm not talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about using my skills to help you build an airtight case. I'm an engineer. I understand systems, processes, evidence chains. And I know Lori better than anyone." Lawrence was quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" Matthew pulled out a small notebook he'd been writing in since returning from his sister's house. "Lori thinks she's clever, but she's predictable. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she claims book club, but she's gone exactly 4 hours and returns with her car's odometer showing 60 to 80 additional miles. That's a very specific radius from our house." He flipped pages. "She gets nervous phone calls that always end with her saying Thursday pickup or Tuesday delivery. She's been insisting we pay cash for everything lately, claiming she wants to simplify our finances. And 3 weeks ago, I found a prepaid phone hidden in her jewelry box." Lawrence's eyebrows rose. "You've been documenting this?" "I'm an engineer, detective. When I see a system failing, I analyze it." Matthew's expression hardened. "I just never thought the system failing was my marriage and the woman I trusted was a monster." Lawrence made several notes. "Mr. Combs, you may be able to help us more than you realize. But first, we need to ensure your safety and your children's safety. These people have killed at least 6 victims that we can identify so far." Matthew's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Lori. "Answer it," Lawrence instructed, nodding to the technician monitoring the call. "Act normal. Don't let her know anything's wrong." Matthew took a breath and answered. "Hey, babe. Matthew, what's going on? There are police cars everywhere, and Mrs. Patterson next door says there are people in hazmat suits going in and out of our house." "Gas leak," Matthew lied smoothly. "Pretty serious one. The gas company called in hazmat as a precaution. I'm at Susan's with the kids until they clear us to go home." There was a pause. That's terrible. How long will we be displaced?" "Could be a few days." They have to check all the appliances, make sure there's no contamination. Matthew met Lawrence's eyes. Where are you? I thought you were at book club. But Sandra called and said she saw the emergency vehicles. I'm heading home now. Don't, Matthew said quickly. They're not letting anyone in the area. Meet us at Susan's instead. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, I'll be there in an hour. When Matthew hung up, Lawrence was already mobilizing his team. We'll have units watching your sister's house. When your wife arrives, we'll arrest her quietly. But Mr. Combs, I need to prepare you. This is just the beginning. Based on what we found, your wife is part of a larger network. Matthew stood, his jaw set with determination. Then we'd better make sure we get all of them. As the afternoon wore on, Matthew began to understand the true scope of the horror his wife had been orchestrating. The trafficking ring used a network of seemingly legitimate businesses, a moving company, a landscaping service, and even a children's charity to identify, transport, and dispose of victims. But Matthew also began to see something else: patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. If Lori thought she was dealing with a heartbroken, naive husband, she was about to discover she'd greatly underestimated the man she'd been deceiving. The game was far from over. In fact, for Matthew Combs, it was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Network Exposed. The arrest of Lori Donovan Combs at Susan's house went smoothly, but her reaction told Matthew everything he needed to know about his wife's true nature. No tears, no protestations of innocence, no emotional appeals. Just cold calculation and immediate demands for a lawyer. She's a professional, Detective Lawrence observed as they watched through the one-way glass at the police station. 23 years of interrogations, and I've never seen someone flip that switch so completely. Matthew studied his wife's posture, straight-backed, alert, conferring with her attorney in whispers. She's not surprised by any of this. She had contingency plans. What makes you say that? Look at her hands. No fidgeting, no stress responses. She's going through a checklist in her mind. Matthew's engineering background had trained him to observe systems under stress. She's stalling, which means she's buying time for something or someone. Lawrence's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he turned to Matthew with a grim expression. You're right. We just lost surveillance on 2 of the businesses we identified from the documents. Their offices have been cleared out, and key personnel have disappeared. Matthew wasn't surprised. She triggered their emergency protocol somehow. Probably a code word during her arrest or through a lawyer. Mr. Combs, I'm going to ask you something. I want you to think carefully before answering. Lawrence sat down across from Matthew. You know your wife better than anyone. If she's as smart as she appears, she'll have prepared for the possibility of getting caught. What would her backup plan look like? Matthew considered the question with the same methodical approach he used for complex engineering problems. Lori always needs control and always has exit strategies. She told me once that her biggest fear was being trapped with no options. He paused. If she's part of a larger network, she either has leverage over them or she has an escape route they don't know about. Leverage, information, records, evidence that could bring down the whole operation. Matthew's eyes widened as the implications hit him. Detective, what if the notebook you found wasn't her only record keeping? What if she kept insurance files? Lawrence immediately called for a more thorough search of the Combs house. Within hours, investigators found a hidden safe behind a false wall in Lori's home office. Inside, detailed financial records, photographs, communications logs, and most damning of all, video recordings of key figures in the trafficking network. Your wife documented everything, Detective Lawrence said, spreading the evidence across a conference table. Names, dates, financial transactions, operational details. It's like she was building a case file. Matthew examined the materials, his anger building as he recognized some of the names. Some of these people, I know them. We've had them to dinner parties. She introduced them as her volunteer work colleagues. One name in particular caught his attention, Ignacio Donovan. That's her brother. I thought he worked in import-export. He does, Lawrence said grimly. Just not the legal kind. According to these records, he's been using his shipping business to transport victims across state lines. This operation is much larger than we initially thought. Matthew studied the organizational chart Lori had meticulously maintained. The network included a dozen businesses across 3 states, with victims being moved through a pipeline that started with identification and grooming, moved through transportation and containment, and ended with disposal. She kept all this as insurance, Matthew realized. If anyone tried to cut her out or eliminate her, she could bring down the entire network. Which means, Lawrence concluded, now that she's been arrested, everyone involved is in damage control mode. They'll either try to eliminate the evidence and witnesses, or eliminate her, Matthew finished. Detective, my wife may be a monster, but she's also the key to stopping this entire operation. If something happens to her in custody. Lawrence nodded. We've already arranged for protective custody. But you're right. We're racing against time. Every hour we delay gives them more opportunity to cover their tracks and disappear. Matthew stood and began pacing, his mind working through the problem. What if we could turn their panic against them? Force them to make mistakes? What do you mean? Lori's arrest will have triggered their emergency protocols, but those protocols assume she's a liability to be eliminated. What if we made them think she was cooperating with law enforcement, that she was giving up everything she knew? Lawrence looked intrigued. You're thinking of a controlled information leak. I'm thinking of psychological warfare, Matthew replied. These people have built their success on secrecy and control. Take that away, make them paranoid about each other, and they'll start making desperate decisions. Over the next several hours, Matthew worked with Detective Lawrence and FBI agent Sarah Chun, who had been called in due to the interstate nature of the crimes. Together, they developed a strategy that would use Lori's own documentation against her former associates. It's risky, Agent Chun warned. If we move too aggressively, we could spook the entire network into going underground. And if we move too slowly, Matthew countered, more people die. These records show they have a shipment scheduled for this weekend. That's not merchandise. Those are human beings. Detective Lawrence made the final call. We go with Mr. Combs' plan, but we do it surgically. Target the key players, apply pressure simultaneously, and force them to react before they can coordinate a response. As the task force prepared for coordinated raids across 3 states, Matthew felt a mixture of satisfaction and cold determination. The careful, methodical approach that had made him successful as an engineer was now being applied to dismantling the network that had destroyed so many lives. But Matthew also knew this was personal. These people hadn't just committed crimes. They had used his home, his marriage, his life as cover for their operations. They had put his children in danger and made him an unwitting accomplice to their horrors. The professional response was justice through the legal system. But Matthew was already considering what would happen if the legal system proved insufficient. Chapter 5. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The coordinated raids yielded mixed results. While law enforcement managed to rescue 7 victims and seize significant evidence, most of the network's leadership had vanished. Only 3 mid-level operatives were arrested, and Ignacio Donovan had disappeared completely. He had a 12-hour head start, Agent Chun explained during the task force debriefing. By the time we hit his shipping facility, everything had been sanitized. Professional job. They even removed traces of DNA evidence. Matthew studied the arrest reports and evidence logs. But you got the financial records before they could clean those out. Most of them, Detective Lawrence confirmed. Your wife's documentation was incredibly thorough. We've frozen over $2 million in assets and identified property in 4 states. What about the victims you rescued? Matthew asked. Agent Chin's expression brightened slightly. All alive, receiving medical care and psychological support. 2 are able to provide testimony about the network's operations. Without your wife's records, we never would have found them in time. Matthew should have felt satisfaction at this victory, but something was nagging at him. Agent Chun, in my experience, when a complex system fails catastrophically, it's usually because someone triggered a cascade failure. The network's response was too coordinated, too thorough. They didn't just have contingency plans, they had inside information about our investigation. Lawrence and Chun exchanged glances. What are you suggesting? Lawrence asked. I'm suggesting that someone with access to our investigation warn them. The timing was too perfect. Matthew pulled out his notebook and began sketching a timeline. We discovered the evidence Monday morning. By Wednesday evening, when we arrested Lori, the network was already evacuating. But we didn't brief the full task force until Tuesday afternoon. Agent Shin leaned forward. You think we have a leak? I think we have someone who's more concerned with protecting the investigation than getting justice for the victims. Matthew's voice hardened. Someone who wanted to make sure the key players escaped. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Lawrence and Chun began reviewing who had access to sensitive information, while Matthew continued his analysis. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your wife isn't the only one with insurance files. Stop digging, or your children will pay the price. Matthew showed the message to the agents, but his expression remained calm. They just made their first real mistake. How so? Chun asked. They're threatening my children instead of me. That means they don't understand who they're dealing with. Matthew's engineering background had taught him that systems under pressure reveal their weaknesses. They think I'm a grieving husband who stumbled into their operation. They're about to learn otherwise. Over the next 48 hours, Matthew used his analytical skills and the resources provided by the task force to map out the network's remaining structure. Using Lori's documentation and the evidence from the raids, he identified patterns in their communications, financial transfers, and operational procedures. But Matthew was also conducting his own parallel investigation, one that didn't rely on official channels. Using contacts from his engineering work and his own technical skills, he began tracing digital footprints that the official investigation might miss. Mr. Combs, Detective Lawrence said during one of their strategy sessions, I need to remind you that you're a civilian consultant, not a law enforcement officer. If you're conducting unauthorized surveillance or investigation. Detective, Matthew interrupted. 3 days ago, I discovered that my wife was using our home as a base of operations for human trafficking. Yesterday, someone threatened my children. I'm not conducting unauthorized investigation. I'm protecting my family using every legal means at my disposal. The distinction was important, both legally and personally. Matthew wasn't seeking revenge. He was systematically identifying and neutralizing threats to his children's safety. That evening, Matthew's parallel investigation yielded results. Cross-referencing financial records, property ownership data, and communication patterns, he identified what appeared to be a safe house outside of Denver where network leadership might be regrouping. But Matthew didn't share this information with the task force immediately. Instead, he conducted additional surveillance, confirming patterns of activity that suggested the location was active. His daughter Lana called that evening. Dad, when can we go home? I miss my room, and Eric is driving me crazy at Aunt Susan's. Soon, sweetheart. The police are almost finished with their work. Matthew's voice was gentle, but his expression was steel. Lana, I need you and Eric to stay exactly where you are until I come get you. Don't go anywhere with anyone else, even if they say I sent them. Dad, you're scaring me. I'm being careful, that's all. I love you both more than anything in this world, and I'm going to make sure you're safe. After ending the call, Matthew made a decision that would define everything that followed. He would share his intelligence with the task force, but he would also take independent action to ensure his children's protection. The network had made this personal when they threatened Eric and Lana. Now, they would discover that threatening a systems engineer's children was a catastrophic error in judgment. Matthew Combs had spent his career solving complex problems through methodical analysis and precise execution. The human trafficking network was simply another system to be analyzed, understood, and ultimately dismantled. But unlike his professional projects, this one was personal. And Matthew was about to demonstrate why that made all the difference. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. The safe house Matthew had identified turned out to be more than just a hideout. It was the network's operational command center. Through careful surveillance using techniques he'd learned during his military engineering service, Matthew confirmed the presence of at least 6 individuals, including Ignacio Donovan. This is bigger than we thought, Agent Chun said as she reviewed Matthew's reconnaissance data. They're not just hiding. They're actively running operations from this location. Detective Lawrence studied the photographs Matthew had taken using a telephoto lens and night vision equipment. How did you get this close without being detected? Patience and proper planning, Matthew replied. I spent 3 days mapping their security patterns, identifying blind spots, and timing their shift changes. They're good, but they're not military trained. They have gaps. What Matthew didn't mention was that his surveillance had revealed something else. The network was preparing to eliminate loose ends, starting with Lori. Intercepted communications suggested they planned to stage her death in custody, making it look like suicide. Agent Chun, I need to speak with my wife, Matthew said. That's not possible. She's in protective custody, and her lawyer has advised her not to speak with anyone. Then we need to arrange a different kind of conversation. Matthew opened his laptop and pulled up a detailed floor plan of the safe house. Because in 18 hours, they're going to try to kill her, and when they do, we lose our best source of intelligence about the network's full scope. Matthew's plan was complex but elegant in its simplicity. Using Lori's own paranoid documentation habits against the network, they would make it appear that she had hidden additional evidence that would be released automatically if anything happened to her. It's called a dead man's switch, Matthew explained. Lori mentioned it once in the context of a thriller novel she was reading. If we can convince the network that killing her would trigger the release of incriminating evidence, they'll be forced to keep her alive. Agent Chin looked skeptical. And if they call our bluff? Then we make sure it's not a bluff, Matthew replied. I've been analyzing the network structure, and I believe I can map their entire operation using the evidence we've already collected. We create a comprehensive dossier, names, locations, financial records, everything, and establish an automated system to release it if Lori dies. Over the next 12 hours, Matthew worked with a team of FBI cyber specialists to create what appeared to be an unbreakable dead man's switch. The system was designed to look sophisticated enough to be credible, while actually being simple enough to be controlled manually. Meanwhile, Detective Lawrence arranged for a carefully staged leak of information suggesting that Lori had cooperated extensively with federal investigators before her lawyer advised silence. The beauty of this approach, Matthew explained to Eric and Lana during a secure video call, is that it uses the network's own paranoia against them. They built their operation on secrecy and mutual distrust. Now, that distrust will tear them apart. Dad, Eric said, this sounds really dangerous. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Matthew looked at his son's concerned face on a laptop screen. Eric, when I design a system, I test every component multiple times before implementation. This is no different. I've analyzed every variable, planned for every contingency. What Matthew didn't tell his children was that his plan had a second phase, one that didn't rely on law enforcement procedures or legal constraints. The first test of Matthew's strategy came at 3:17 a.m., when the network attempted to breach the facility where Lori was being held in protective custody. The attempt was sophisticated, involving forged federal credentials and an elaborate story about transferring Lori to a more secure location. But Matthew had anticipated this exact scenario and worked with Agent Chun to establish protocols that required multi-level verification for any movement of high-value prisoners. The attempted breach failed, but it confirmed that the network was desperate enough to take enormous risks. More importantly, it proved that Matthew's analysis of their decision-making patterns was accurate. Phase 1 successful, Matthew reported to the task force. They've confirmed that keeping Lori alive is now a priority. That gives us operational space to move to Phase 2. Which is? Detective Lawrence asked. Matthew smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. Phase 2 is where we stop reacting to their moves and start controlling the game board. Matthew's engineering background had taught him that complex systems often had single points of failure, critical components whose malfunction would cause cascade failures throughout the entire system. The human trafficking network was no different. After days of analysis, Matthew had identified the network's single point of failure, their communication system. Every operation, every financial transaction, every movement of personnel flowed through a secured communications hub that Ignacio Donovan controlled personally. If we can compromise their communications, Matthew explained. We can do more than just intercept their messages. We can inject false information, create confusion, and turn their coordination system against them. Agent Shin looked impressed despite herself. You're talking about sophisticated cyber warfare, Mr. Combs. That's not typically a civilian skill set. Agent Shun, Matthew replied. I design control systems for advanced aircraft. Compromising a criminal network's communications is actually less complicated than debugging flight control software. As Matthew began implementing Phase 2 of his plan, he felt the satisfaction that came with applying his professional skills to a problem that mattered more than anything else in his life. The network had threatened his children and used his wife to violate everything he held sacred. Now, they would learn what happened when they targeted a systems engineer's family. Chapter 7: Digital Warfare. Matthew's cyber assault on the network's communications began at precisely 2 a.m. on Friday morning. Using a combination of social engineering, technical exploits, and the network's own paranoid security protocols against them, he gained access to their central communications hub within 43 minutes. Impressive, Agent Shin admitted as she watched Matthew work from the FBI's cybercrimes unit. You're moving through their security like it's not even there. That's because I'm not trying to break their security, Matthew explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm using their own authorization protocols. Lori's documentation included administrative passwords and system access codes. They trusted her completely. What followed was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Matthew began injecting subtle inconsistencies into the network's communications. Messages that appeared to come from legitimate sources, but contained small discrepancies that would create doubt and suspicion. A message from Ignacio Donovan to his lieutenant in Phoenix contained financial figures that didn't match previous communications. A shipping schedule from the logistics coordinator included pickup times that conflicted with established patterns. Asset transfer instructions included account numbers that had been compromised in the previous raids. You're making them paranoid about each other, Detective Lawrence observed. I'm accelerating a process that was already underway, Matthew corrected. Criminal organizations like this survive on trust and predictability. When either of those elements becomes questionable, the organization begins to cannibalize itself. Within 6 hours, the network's communications traffic had increased by 400% as members desperately tried to verify information and confirm loyalties. But Matthew had anticipated this response and had prepared the second phase of his digital assault. Using the increased communications as cover, Matthew deployed what he privately called the Lori Protocol, a series of automated messages that appeared to be coming from multiple sources within the network, all suggesting that various members were cooperating with law enforcement. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Within 12 hours, the network had effectively paralyzed itself with mutual suspicion and preemptive strikes against suspected traitors. Mr. Combs, Agent Shin said, reviewing intercepts from the network's fragmenting communications, what you've accomplished in 18 hours would typically require months of undercover work and enormous resources. Matthew didn't respond immediately. He was monitoring a particular conversation between Ignacio Donovan and someone identified only as the coordinator, a previously unknown figure who appeared to be the network's actual leadership. Agent Chun, Matthew said finally, I need to accelerate the timeline. The coordinator is ordering the elimination of all operational personnel, including Ignacio. They're going to disappear completely and rebuild the network from scratch. How long do we have? Based on our logistics discussions, 72 hours. After that, everyone we haven't caught will be gone, and the victims still in the pipeline will be. Matthew didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Detective Lawrence leaned over Matthew's shoulder. What do you need? I need to force the coordinator into the open. Right now, they're insulated from the network's collapse because they maintained operational distance. But there's one thing that will make them take direct action, which is Matthew's expression hardened. The suggestion that Lori has been cooperating not just with federal law enforcement, but with international agencies. That her documentation includes details about overseas operations and money laundering through foreign banks. Agent Shin looked concerned. Mr. Combs, if you make that kind of claim, You'll be painting a target on your wife's back that we might not be able to protect her from. My wife painted that target on herself when she chose to participate in human trafficking, Matthew replied coldly. But more importantly, the coordinator won't be able to resist the opportunity to eliminate the threat personally. They'll come out of hiding to ensure the job gets done right. What Matthew didn't explain was that he was also using this strategy to force a personal confrontation. The analytical part of his mind recognized that the legal system might not deliver the kind of justice he felt was appropriate for people who had used his family and threatened his children. Over the next 24 hours, Matthew implemented the most sophisticated disinformation campaign of his career. Using the network's compromised communications, he created the impression that Lori had been secretly cooperating with Interpol, the DEA, and FBI international task forces for months. Forged communications suggested that Lori had provided detailed information about overseas money laundering operations, international transportation routes, and foreign contacts. Most damaging of all, fabricated evidence suggested that she had been recording conversations and documenting activities specifically to build cases against the network's leadership. The response was swift and decisive. The coordinator, revealed through intercepted communications to be someone named Albert Villanueva, personally ordered the immediate elimination of Lori and the comprehensive sanitization of all network operations. But Albert made a crucial error. He decided to personally oversee Lori's elimination to ensure no mistakes were made. "We have him," Agent Chen announced as surveillance teams tracked Albert's movement toward the federal facility where Lori was being held. "He's bringing a full tactical team, but we're ready." Matthew studied the tactical briefing with the same attention to detail he brought to engineering schematics. "Agent Chen, I want to be part of the arrest team." "Mr. Combs, that's absolutely not appropriate. You're a civilian consultant." "Agent Chen," Matthew replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to, "I've spent 2 weeks systematically dismantling a criminal network that threatened my family. I've provided intelligence, tactical analysis, and operational planning that has saved lives and prevented additional crimes." He stood, his expression resolute. "Albert Villanueva ordered the death of my wife and threatened my children. I want to look him in the eye when he's arrested, so he understands exactly who defeated him." Detective Lawrence intervened. "Chun, he's been right about everything so far, and technically, he'll be safer with us than anywhere else when this goes down." Agent Chun considered the request, then nodded reluctantly. "You are protective gear, you stay behind the tactical team, and you don't interfere with the arrest." "Understood," Matthew agreed. But as they prepared for the confrontation with Albert Villanueva, Matthew was already thinking beyond the arrest. The legal system would handle the prosecution and imprisonment. But Matthew had his own plans for ensuring that the people who had threatened his family understood the full consequences of their choices. The game was entering its final phase, and Matthew Combs intended to control every move. Chapter 8. Face to Face with Evil. Albert Villanueva arrived at the federal facility at 11:47 p.m. with a 6-person tactical team, sophisticated equipment, and a plan that would have succeeded against normal law enforcement preparation. But Albert had no way of knowing that his every move had been anticipated by a systems engineer who had spent 2 weeks analyzing his decision-making patterns. "Target acquired," came the voice through Matthew's earpiece as he crouched behind an armored vehicle 50 yards from the facility entrance. Agent Chun had reluctantly allowed him to observe the operation, though he was positioned well away from the primary action. Matthew watched through night vision binoculars as Albert's team began their approach. They moved with military precision, but Matthew noticed something that made him smile grimly. They were following exactly the infiltration pattern he had predicted in his tactical analysis. "Chun," Matthew whispered into his radio, "they're going to hit the southeast service entrance in 90 seconds. They have shaped charges for the security door, and they'll deploy flashbangs before entry." "How can you be so specific?" came Chen's voice. "Because Albert is a control freak, and control freaks follow predictable patterns when under pressure," Matthew replied. "He's planned this operation the same way he plans everything else, with redundancy and overwhelming force applied at the perceived point of weakness." The arrest operation unfolded exactly as Matthew had predicted. Albert's team breached the service entrance, deployed their flashbangs, and advanced toward what they believed was Lori's holding area. Instead, they found themselves in a carefully prepared trap, surrounded by federal agents who had been waiting in concealed positions. The tactical phase was over in less than 3 minutes. Albert's team was neutralized without shots being fired, though 2 agents sustained minor injuries during the takedown. But it was what happened next that Matthew had been waiting for. Albert Villanueva, zip-tied and seated in the back of an FBI transport van, was not the sophisticated criminal mastermind Matthew had expected. He was an overweight man in his 50s with soft hands and nervous eyes, someone who had built his empire by staying far from the violence and letting others do the dangerous work. "Mr. Villanueva," Agent Chun said as she approached the transport van, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 15 other federal charges. You have the right to remain silent." Albert's eyes darted around desperately before settling on Matthew, who stood just behind Agent Chun. "You're him, aren't you? The husband?" Matthew stepped closer to the van. "Yes, I am. This is all her fault," Albert said, his voice taking on a whining quality. "Lori got greedy, started keeping too many records, took too many risks. I told her the business had to stay small, controllable." "The business," Matthew repeated, his voice flat. "You mean the systematic kidnapping, abuse, and murder of human beings?" Albert's expression shifted to something Matthew recognized from his engineering work. The look of someone trying to solve a problem by eliminating inconvenient variables. "Look, Mr. Combs, I understand you're upset about your wife's activities, but this can all be resolved quietly. I have resources, connections. Your children could benefit significantly from a more understanding approach to this situation." Agent Chin started to intervene, but Matthew held up a hand. "What exactly are you suggesting, Albert?" "I'm suggesting that accidents happen. People disappear, but they don't have to. Not if everyone involved understands the mutual benefits of discretion." Matthew studied Albert's face with the same analytical attention he gave to complex engineering problems. "You're offering to spare my children's lives in exchange for my cooperation in covering up your crimes." "I'm offering to make sure everyone gets what they really want," Albert replied. "You want your family safe. I want to continue my business operations. There's no reason we can't reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." Matthew was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had made a final decision. "Albert, I want you to understand something very clearly. You threaten my children. You use my wife to operate a criminal enterprise from my home. You've destroyed the lives of dozens of innocent people." He leaned closer to the van. "I'm a systems engineer, Albert. I solve complex problems by identifying the critical failure points and eliminating them. You are a critical failure point." Albert's expression changed from calculating to fearful. "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent 2 weeks documenting every aspect of your organization. I know your real name, your financial holdings, your operational methods. And most importantly, I know every crime you've committed and everyone who helped you commit them." Matthew straightened up. "Agent Chun has enough evidence to convict you on multiple federal charges. But that's just the legal system, Albert. There's also the personal system. I don't understand what you're." "The personal system is what happens when someone threatens a family man's children," Matthew interrupted. "The legal system will put you in prison for the rest of your life. The personal system will make sure that everyone you ever cared about understands exactly what kind of monster you are." Matthew turned to Agent Chun. "I believe Mr. Villanueva is ready to be transported to federal holding. He has a lot to think about." As the transport van pulled away, Agent Chun looked at Matthew with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Mr. Combs, what did you mean by the personal system?" Matthew was quiet for a moment, watching the taillights disappear into the night. "Agent Chun, the legal system will handle Albert's prosecution and imprisonment. But Albert has family members, business associates, and social connections who have no idea what he's been doing. I think they deserve to know. You're talking about destroying his reputation and relationships. I'm talking about ensuring that the consequences of his choices extend beyond a prison sentence," Matthew replied. Albert built his life on deception and compartmentalization. I'm going to make sure that compartmentalization collapses completely. As they prepared to leave the arrest site, Matthew felt a sense of completion that went beyond simple justice. The systems engineer in him appreciated the elegant resolution. Every threat neutralized, every loose end tied up, every component of the criminal network identified and dismantled. But more than that, Matthew knew that his children could finally come home. The nightmare that had begun with a routine appliance repair was finally over. Or so he thought. Chapter 9. Justice and Resolution. 6 months after Albert Villanueva's arrest, Matthew stood in the kitchen of his renovated home, watching Eric and Lana prepare breakfast before school. The house had been extensively remodeled after the FBI released it as a crime scene. New flooring, fresh paint, and most importantly, no basement chest freezer. "Dad," Lana said, scrambling eggs while Eric made toast. "Mrs. Henderson says the trial starts next week. Are you going to testify?" Matthew nodded. "Both Albert and your mother will be sentenced based partly on my testimony and the evidence we gathered." He didn't mention that Lori had attempted to negotiate a plea agreement that would have reduced her sentence in exchange for additional cooperation. Matthew had encouraged federal prosecutors to reject the offer. Eric looked up from the toaster. "What do you think will happen to them?" "Albert will spend the rest of his life in federal prison," Matthew replied matter-of-factly. "The charges include multiple counts of human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and racketeering. His minimum sentence is life without parole." "And Mom?" Lana asked quietly. Matthew's expression softened slightly. "Your mother made terrible choices that hurt innocent people. She'll also spend many years in prison. But she's still your mother, and if you ever want to write to her or visit her, I'll support that decision." What Matthew didn't tell his children was that his personal system had been even more effective than the legal system. Albert's wife had divorced him and moved across the country with their children after learning about his crimes. His business associates had terminated all relationships and cooperated fully with investigators to distance themselves from his activities. His social circle had completely ostracized him. More importantly, Matthew had used his technical skills to ensure that Albert's criminal activities became widely known in federal prison. Inmates who trafficked children rarely fared well in the prison hierarchy. Detective Lawrence called that afternoon with an update. "Mr. Combs, I wanted to let you know that the trafficking network has been completely dismantled. We've rescued 37 victims total, made 43 arrests across 8 states, and seized over $8 million in assets." "What about the victims?" Matthew asked. "Are they getting the help they need?" "All survivors are receiving comprehensive support, medical care, psychological counseling, legal assistance, and help reintegrating into society. Several have specifically asked me to thank you for your role in their rescue." After ending the call, Matthew returned to his home workshop, where he was crafting a custom chess set, a project that required precision, patience, and long-term planning. The same skills that had made him an effective engineer and had enabled him to dismantle a criminal network. Agent Chin visited that evening to provide final case updates. "Mr. Combs, I wanted you to know that your analytical work has been incorporated into FBI training protocols. The systematic approach you use to map and disrupt the network is being taught to agents specializing in organized crime." "I'm glad something positive can come from this experience," Matthew replied. "Any word on whether there are other networks operating similar schemes?" "We've identified several suspicious operations using techniques based on your analytical framework," Chin confirmed. "Your work isn't just going to put Albert and Lori in prison. It's going to help us catch other criminals who use similar methods." That night, Matthew sat in his living room with Eric and Lana, watching a movie and eating popcorn. It was a scene of domestic normalcy that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "Dad," Eric said during a commercial break, "I've been thinking about what I want to study in college. I still want to be an engineer like you, but I also want to understand how criminals think. Maybe criminal psychology or forensic analysis." Matthew smiled. "That sounds like an excellent combination. The world needs people who can understand both the technical and human aspects of solving complex problems." Lana, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Dad, I've been having nightmares about Mom. Not about what she did, but about, what if I'm like her? What if there's something wrong with me too? Matthew set down his popcorn and looked directly at his daughter. Lana, character isn't genetic. It's developed through choices, experiences, and the values you embrace. You and Eric have shown more courage, integrity, and compassion during this ordeal than many adults show in their entire lives. He pulled both children closer. Your mother made her choices. You'll make yours. And based on everything I've observed about your character, I have complete confidence in the people you're becoming. 3 months later, Matthew received a letter from one of the trafficking victims who had been rescued. Maria Santos, a 19-year-old from El Paso, wrote that she was now studying social work and planned to help other survivors of human trafficking. Mr. Combs, her letter read, I wanted you to know that your decision to fight for justice instead of just accepting what happened has changed my life and the lives of 36 other people. We get to live, go to school, have families, and make our own choices because you refuse to give up. Thank you for proving that good people still exist and still fight for what's right. Matthew kept the letter in his workshop next to a photograph of Eric and Lana at their high school graduation. Both had been accepted to excellent universities, and both planned to pursue careers that involve helping others. On the first anniversary of the day, Charlie Ingram found the contents of the chest freezer. Matthew made a point of calling the appliance repairman. Charlie, this is Matthew Combs. I wanted to thank you again for your courage and for doing the right thing, even though it was difficult. Mr. Combs, Charlie replied, I've been fixing appliances for 30 years and I've never seen anything like that day. But I've also never seen anyone handle a situation like that with the strength and intelligence you showed. You should be proud of what you accomplished. After ending the call, Matthew returned to his workshop, where he was designing a new project, a memorial sculpture for the victims of human trafficking. The piece would incorporate precision machine components, artistic elements, and most importantly, the names of every victim who had been rescued as a result of the investigation. Matthew Combs had learned that sometimes the most important engineering challenges weren't technical problems. They were human problems that required technical solutions. He had also learned that protecting the people you love sometimes required not just strength and intelligence, but the willingness to do whatever was necessary to ensure their safety. The chest freezer was gone, replaced by a new model that served only its intended purpose. But Matthew would never forget what he had learned about systems, failure points, and the importance of methodical analysis when everything you cared about was at stake. His family was safe. Justice had been served. And Matthew Combs had discovered that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to refuse to accept that it was impossible. The nightmare was over. The future belonged to him, and there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.